Excellencies, Reverend Fathers, dear colleagues, the contribution of Archbishop Anastasios to the scientific study of religion constitutes one of the most interesting examples of a fruitful encounter between ecclesiastical experience and religious methodology in the academic environment of the 20th century and 21st century. Okay. Despite the fact that he is more widely known ecclesiastically for his missionary and pastoral work, his scientific imprint within the field of religious studies, where the approach to the religious phenomenon presupposes not dogmatic integration, but its systematic, comparative, and cultural understanding. His contribution is not simply descriptive, it is a methodological, as it reintroduces into the academia the demand for the study of religion as an anthropological and cultural event, and not only as a theological category. The paper presents precisely this contribution, not the missionary or ecclesiastical activity of Anastasios, but his theoretical and methodological imprint in the field of modern religious studies. In the theoretical work of Archbishop Anastasios, religion is defined neither in exclusively theological nor in narrowly sociological terms. On the contrary, it is presented as a totality of experience that includes man's reference to the transcendent, the meaning of his existence, and the organization of his collective life. Around this experience, Anastasios rejects both legalistic and philosophical approaches that limit religion to a system of ideas, arguing that it constitutes the ecumenical experience of man relating to the other, which gives ultimate meaning to the existence. This approach draws directly from the intellectual climate of German university education in the 50s and 60s, where the phenomenology of religion had acquired a central position. The influences of Rupert Otto, Gerardus Vandelev, and Michel Eade, who were then dominant in German universities, are evident in Anastasios' language and method. Religion is not an object that the researcher studies, but a phenomenon that is revealed to man through the experience of the sacred. As Eliade notes, religious experience reveals a different order of reality, the sacred, which makes the world possible. It is precisely this phenomenological dimension that Anastasios adopts, considering that the sacred cannot be conceived without the participation of the subject who experiences it. However, Anastasios does not stay in the phenomenology of experience. He connects the religion with its historical and cultural dimension, choosing a historical comparative perspective. Here we encounter his second major theoretical current, which attributes religion not only to existential experience, but also to its cultural manifestation over time. This synthesis of the two approaches, the phenomenological and the historical comparative, allows Anastasios to avoid both purely metaphysical interpretation and psychological reduction. Religion is for him both historical and existential. Anastasios places this unity within a theological horizon, but without sacrificing scientificity. He seeks a description that respects the experiential authenticity of believers, but also maintains analytical detachment. In Anastasios' work, religion is not understood as a set of dogmatic beliefs, nor as a social institutional system, but as a human experience that gives meaning to existence and organizes his collective life. From a historical comparative school, he draws attention to the path of religious forms and their cultural transformations. In contrast, however, to the more positivist versions of comparative religion, Anastasios insists that the description of phenomena must be accompanied by an effort to understand their inner meaning. For this reason, he considers it necessary for historical analysis to coexist with the researcher's personal participation in the reality he's studying, an attitude that stems from his own experience of field research in multicultural environments. The unity of the experiential and cultural elements, as Anastasios understands it, differentiates his thinking from the one-sided approaches of his time. Religion is neither a subjective psychological experience nor a simple historical fact. It is a fact that simultaneously reveals man and his culture. Thus, the study of religion becomes essentially anthropological. Only anyone who participates, even temporarily, in the way of life of a community can understand how it experiences the sacred and shapes its worldview. In Anastasios' religious thought, mission is not simply a practical application of theological principles, but a privileged field of control and verification of the theory of religion as an experiential and cultural phenomenon. In contrast to older perceptions that link missionary work with cultural imposition or the devaluation of other religions, Anastasios approaches it as a place of encounter, dialogue, and mutual understanding. His experience in multi-religious environments, mainly in Africa, leads him to the conclusion that religion is inextricably linked to the cultural identity of people. Consequently, any attempt to communicate the Christian message that ignores or bypasses the culture of the other is doomed either to failure or to an alteration of the religious content itself. As he points out, true testimony is not achieved by abolishing the culture of the other, but by respecting and creatively encountering it. Archbishop Anastasios' approach to the study of religion is deeply rooted in empirical and ethnological methods, emphasizing the necessity of direct engagement with the communities being studied. His methodology advocates for immersive field research, where understanding religious practices and beliefs arises from first-hand experience and interaction with the cultural contexts in which they are expressed. This hands-on approach not only enriches the researcher's insight, but also fosters a genuine comprehension of the lived realities of diverse religious traditions. The empirical and ethnological element constitutes one of the fundamental axes of Anastasios' religious model and constitutes its basic differentiation from both the traditional theological approach and purely theoretical versions of religious studies. The study of religion, according to Anastasios, cannot be limited to the analysis of texts or the comparative elaboration of dogmatic schemes, but requires direct contact with societies and cultures, where the religious phenomenon is experienced daily. This ethnological sensitivity is inextricably linked to Anastasios' field experience in non-Western cultural environments, especially in Africa. There he found that religion functions as an organic element of the social structure, moral order, and worldview of communities. It is not therefore a separate field of culture, but a central axis of the formation of human experience. This observation is consistent with the ethnological view of religion as a symbolic system that organizes the meaning of life, but without being limited to functional interpretations. Compared to the phenomenological tradition, the ethnological element in Anastasios' work functions as a corrective mechanism against ancestral tendencies. While phenomenology focuses on the experience of the sacred as a universal human phenomenon, Anastasios insists that this experience acquires specific content only within historical and cultural contexts. This position is in agreement with the modern theoretical point that empirical and ethnological research functions as a necessary counterweight to the generalization of phenomenological categories. The comparative method occupies a central position in Anastasios' religious model and functions as a basic tool for understanding the diversity of religious expressions. For him, the comparison does not aim at ranking religions or at searching for an abstract core that would equalize different traditions, but at revealing both the common existential questions and the historical determined answers given by individual religions. Anastasios' comparative approach is clearly part of the framework of historical comparative religious studies. Historicity is a basic prerequisite for comparison. Each religious phenomenon is examined within its specific social, cultural, and temporal context before being compared with other similar phenomena. In this way, abstract syncretism is avoided, and the scientific validity of the comparative analysis is ensured. At the level of theoretical influences, Anastasios' comparative method shows affinities with the phenomenological tradition, mainly in terms of the attempt to understand religion from within. However, in contrast to some phenomenological approaches that tend to isolate religious experience from its historical conditions, Anastasios insists that comparison loses its meaning when disconnected from the specific historical experience of religious communities. This position is consistent with a contemporary observation that the history of religions functions as a necessary methodological background for any valid comparison. The concept of participatory observation holds also a special place and is directly linked to the empirical and anthropological background of his research. The researcher's direct involvement in the field, personal contact with religious communities, and the experience of ritual practices are, according to Anastasios, necessary conditions for understanding religion as a living reality and not as an abstract system of ideas. The concept of other is a fundamental component of Anastasios' religious model and functions as a central axis for interpreting religious experience. For him, understanding religion cannot be achieved within a closed cultural or confessional context, but presupposes the encounter with otherness. The other, whether as a bearer of a different religious tradition or as a member of a different cultural world, is not an object of simple observation, but an active interlocutor in the process of knowledge. This position presents clear affinities with phenomenological and dialogical approaches to religion, where understanding arises through the suspension of value judgments and the attempt to perceive meaning as experienced by the bearer of religious experience himself. However, Anastasios is not limited to a methodological era with purely epistemological goals. On the contrary, it places the other in a broader anthropological and ethical context, where respect for otherness is a necessary condition for both scientific understanding and human coexistence. At this point, the role of the other goes beyond its narrow religious function and acquires a normative character. Understanding religion is directly linked to the researcher's attitude towards the bearer of faith. The rejection of ethnocentrism, cultural arrogance, and hierarchical evaluation schemes is not simply an ethical choice, but a methodological necessity for the scientific validity of research. Anastasios' religious model applies to diverse areas within religious studies and allowing for nonsense examinations of various religious phenomena. This thematic application showcases the depth and breadth of his approach, bridging theoretical insights with real-world religious practices. Anastasios advocates the empirical methods that prioritize lived experience and cultural context, thus enriching the study of religion. This empirical approach facilitates a more understanding of religion. This connection between religion and dialogue promotes a cooperative and pluralistic approach to studying faith and spirituality. So, in total, the several theoretical topics, in order to conclude, had to do with religions of Africa, world religions, interreligious dialogue, orthodoxy in culture, religion and social cohesion, that will be analyzed more in the published paper. So let me conclude in order to save some time. Okay. This paper highlighted the contribution of Archbishop Anastasios to the formation and consolidation of the scientific study of religion in the academic arena through a coherent, methodologically clear and empirical founded religious approach. The analysis of his work demonstrated that religious studies, as he understands and practices, is neither a branch of theology nor an abstract theoretical construct, but an autonomous scientific field with a clear research object and methodological tools. A central feature of Anastasios' religious model is the combination of the historical comparative method with a strong empirical and anthropological dimension. The study of religion is founded on knowledge of the historical development of religious traditions, on the comparative presentation of their forms and structures, but also on direct contact with societies where the religious phenomenon is experienced as an everyday reality. This choice removes religious studies from abstract generalizations, repositions it in the realm of living human experience. Overall, Anastasios' religious work can be characterized as a synthesis of historical accuracy, anthropological sensitivity, and dialogical orientation. His contribution is not limited to the production of scientific knowledge, but extends to the formation of a way of studying religion that respects diversity, avoids reductionism, and recognizes religion as a universal and at the same time historically determined human phenomenon. In this sense, Anastasios' work constitutes an essential point or reference for modern religious studies and its future development. Thank you very much for